Hello indie game fan, let's begin with Wolcen, Lords of Mayhem, one of the most controversial picks on the list, since while it did sell quite a number of copies, it does have a mixed rating on Steam for a variety of reasons. 2+ years after launch, it does seem like this game is still full of bugs, but if you're lucky enough to avoid those, I do think that the action is pretty good but definitely comes with an asterisk. I love indie games, so I want to use this platform to highlight some smaller games, one of which is Ghostlore, coming to us from a developer from my home country of Singapore. As compared to the Greek, Egyptian, Nordic or Slavic mythology that these games tend to draw upon, this instead takes inspiration from Southeast Asia, so you will see Pontianaks and Chinese Guis or hungry ghosts, instead of the generic Western concept of a spirit. The character class variety is atypical and quite varied as well, making this one of interest. The age of a game usually does not matter, since classics like the original Diablo 2 are still being played to this day, so I do want to give a special mention to The Incredible Adventures of Van Helsing Final Cut, being a compilation of 3 games that dates back to 2013. As the legendary vampire hunter with a spirit by your side, adventure and save the land of Borgovia through what else but the slaughter of hordes of enemies. While there is a named character, there are 6 character classes that you can spec into, and even has 4-player co-op with multiple Van Helsings, where I did have quite a bit of fun with friends. Simply put, Book of Demons is Diablo 1 in story and setting, where you adventure in the catacombs beneath an old cathedral in order to stop the archdemon, even having the equivalent of Deckard Cain and Jillian in town. However, your character can only move along the lanes, with skills and equipment determined in part by the cards in your hand, with a fantastic papercraft look as well. I'm branching out a little with Tribes of Midgard, a survival action RPG which is a combination that has increased in popularity. This is a Norse mythology themed entry where you are battling giants, having to stop them from destroying the seed of the world tree Yggdrasil in your home base. I really like the art style here, and for better or worse, it's a live service game with seasonal content, where Season 3, The Infernal Saga, is supposed to begin on August the 16th, making it a good time to jump in. A smaller indie game that has been chugging along in early access is the Slormancer, where don't be fooled by the top-down pixel art look, the combat here is on par with what you would find in a Diablo game and is very good. While there are only 3 characters in the warrior, archer and mage archetypes, the skill tree, loot, crafting and progression systems are extensive, with even more content to come. Since we last took a look at this game, Act 3, the Mage Academy has been added, along with reworks of the earlier chapters, where this continues to be a shining beacon for indie ARPGs, and I cannot wait for the full release. A game that I've confused with The Incredible Adventures of Van Helsing in the past is Victor Vran, where you play as a demon hunter instead of a vampire hunter, but do fight your way through hordes of the undead, giant spiders, vampires, wraiths, hellhounds and so on. However, there are more mobility options here, like the ability to jump, and does feature the voice talent of one Geralt of Rivia, definitely being of interest. The poster child for indie action RPGs is Chronicon, one that does look similar to the Slormancer covered earlier, since it has a similar pixel art look and camera angle, which I suppose is the most effective way for a small team to make one of these. If you have not played this, there is a surprising amount of depth and endgame content, but do not be overwhelmed or intimidated by the footage in this trailer, since it starts off relatively more manageable, but then gives you godlike powers and abilities as you carve a path through your enemies. Post 1.0 release, this developer has continued to patch and balance the game, even adding in new features, and really seems like a labour of love, being a solo developer worth supporting. This next title can also be considered controversial, since we finally had the Western release for Lost Ark earlier this year. and to be fair, it has been very popular and does have its share of fans. However, it is structured more like an MMO and is from a Korean developer, where if you're not familiar, the free-to-play model is very popular there, with titles like MU Online, Lineage, and even MapleStory being such examples, and with that, of course, comes pay-to-win concerns, which are very valid here. However, I think that if you take it as a standalone action RPG and are not super competitive about it, you could do much worse than this free entry, where there is quite an impressive number of character classes. The developers have also been putting out content at a fairly decent rate, so there's always something new to check out. Another new title of interest is The Ascent from last year, a cyberpunk action RPG that, granted, has more ranged combat and shooting, but has plenty of loot and upgrades and some pretty good action. Many people, including myself, have remarked how this relatively small team of less than 20 has managed to create a cyberpunk world and aesthetic so much better than the multi-million-dollar budget of Cyberpunk 2077 with less bugs, and yes, while it's not exactly a fair comparison due to the camera angle and the scope of this game, I really like the look here. Do be warned that it has a really slow start, but the premise and world is certainly worth experiencing. Titan Quest Anniversary Edition is one of the most amazing stories in games, since the original was released in 2006 and is a classic, but then it got lost in the mix, where the IP was in limbo but got finally picked up by the Embracer Group, remastering this in 2016 and even releasing additional DLC with Ragnarok in 2017, Atlantis in 2019, and Eternal Embers in 2021, where it's crazy how a 15-year-old game continues to get new content. The Freeform Plus system is awesome, and as a mythology buff myself, I loved the original concept of this back in the day, where it's still worth a play in 2022. The last Diablo-like title that strays a little from the original is V Rising, another isometric action title but crossed with a survival game. You play as a recently reawakened vampire, weak after being starved for blood for a long time, having to hunt and rebuild your empire to its former glory. This is quite literal in this game, since you can build and expand your castle or home base while adventuring out into the open world to prey on villagers or to hunt monsters, all while paying close attention to time of day since sunlight is still deadly. While it is still in early access, there's plenty of content with easily 70 plus hours of gameplay, where it comes to us from developer Stunlock Studios, who made the popular but no longer supported MOBA Battle Right, so the pedigree is there for this to be great. Among the 10,000 or so Warhammer games, Warhammer 40,000 Inquisitor Martyr does stand out as being the standout action RPG that uses this IP, set in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, where there's only war and chaos. Playing as an Inquisitor carrying out the Emperor's will, enter a chaos infected sector and purge the heretics. It is one of the newer entries on the list, having come out in 2018, and as such still looks pretty sharp, where there is also character class variety and all sorts of enemies to kill, where they even released a standalone expansion named Prophecy in 2019, worth a play. After all this time, Torchlight 2 still holds up, being a marked improvement from the original and better than its sequel Torchlight 3, since that was made by another developer. At the time, Runic Games were composed of ex-Blizzard North developers, who were the people that made Diablo 2, so despite the more cartoony look, this can be seen as a spiritual successor to Diablo. There were a bunch of quality of life improvements, where most importantly, mods have extended the life of this title, but the base content is still great and earns its spot in history. Another year has passed and yet Last Epoch is still in early access, but I do think that we're beginning to see glimpses of the light at the end of the tunnel, with the next update being version 0.9.0. This is a time-traveling entry that has you adventuring in various epochs of time, where as a result, you do get quite a variety in settings and enemies, battling against a primal force only known as the Void, which seeks to consume everything. This has really impressed me in the 3 years of early access so far, and I don't expect the developers to fumble the ball at the 1 yard line, so here's wishing them all the best as we look forward to the full release. Over the years, we've seen the rise and fall of a number of Diablo-style action RPGs, but what remains somewhat consistent is that the developers behind these games tend to move around and regroup, where Grim Dawn comes to us from the developer of Titan Quest after their former studio, Iron Law Entertainment, was shut down in 2008. You can see the lineage here with how classes and the skill tree works in this game, but they took lessons learned and improved, where this has been their main project since 2008 up until this year. They released 3 DLCs for this in Crucible Mode, Ashes of Melmoth, and Forgotten Gods, which have acted like full-on old-school expansion packs and continues to be a standout experience. Like Torchlight 2, this is beloved by the community, which has led to some impressive mods as well, but if you love the developer and want to continue to support them, their next title is releasing next week, so come back tomorrow and I'll bring that up again. The titan that keeps on rolling is Path of Exile, a great game with awesome combat, surprisingly interesting lore, the iconic mega skill tree, and frequent significant content updates, being the poster child for how to do free-to-play right. 9 years on, its titanic size can be intimidating and maybe to its detriment, but in my books, this is the most successful Diablo-like game, and for a look at upcoming titles, watch this video and I will see you after the jump.